Live and direct, live and I take no jive.
Legalize it.
Come here, much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, "Great, Barry, a reefer."
Hi, and welcome back to the Karma Koala podcast. My name is Sean Hocking, and on this episode, I've got, and I hope I pronounce your name correctly because I'm useless. Tshepo Madlingozi, and he is a commissioner at the South African Human Rights Commission, and he focuses on anti-racism, education, and equality, and is also the co-editor of the South African Journal on Human Rights. Why we're talking to Tshepo is he's also done work on the impact of cannabis for the Private Purposes Act, which is we've discussed before on the podcast, and you can learn more about on the website. And with the notes on these, I'll also provide some information about how that act came into play. And Tshepo has worked with the Rastafarian community in South Africa, I presume, to try and help them practice what they do without too much interference from the forces of law and order. Tshepo, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here, Sean, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning to your listeners.
Well, yes, exactly. First up, you've worked in human rights for a while. What walked you towards cannabis? Was it the introduction of the legislation after the constitutional case, or were you working before?
Yes, let me first start by saying the South African Human Rights Commission is a constitutional body. So we are not a state department, nor are we civil society. We are an independent body created in terms of the constitution. We've got powers to monitor, to protect, and to promote human rights. And one of those powers and functions, as part of that, we receive a lot of complaints from members of the public alleging violations of their human rights. Now, what happened was that we continue to receive a lot of complaints from members of the Rastafari community, as well as other cannabis using individuals who say to us, look, there was a constitutional court case 7 years ago that decriminalized cannabis use by adults. There was also an act that you mentioned that was signed into law last year, the day before the elections.
I say 1 day prior to the election.
Absolutely, 24 hours before the elections. But Rastafarian continue to be profiled. They continue to be harassed. They continue to be arrested for possessing cannabis or for cultivating cannabis. That's one part of it. But apart from that, I came into office last year in January. And when I came in under this mandate of anti-racism, equality, and education, I decided that the Rastafari community would be one of two priority communities for me, communities that I will pay a lot of attention to. Why? Because from my previous work, I've been working in civil society and human rights for the past 20 years. And I've seen how Rastafari people continue to be marginalized, they continue to be criminalized, they continue to be harassed, not only for possessing of cannabis, but because of their religion, because of their culture, because of how they look. So I decided that I'm gonna proactively engage with Rastafari community to hear what are some of their challenges and to see what I can do as a national commissioner, as part of the powers that I have to look at their situation. Now, of course, there are a lot of challenges that they face, but a key part of that is cannabis, because cannabis is central to their way,
to the way that they practice.
Cannabis,
yeah,
the way they practice. Without cannabis, there's no practice, there's no culture, there's no religion, there's no identity. So we are very clear as a Human Rights Commission that adult possession and adult use of cannabis is decriminalized, and the state must stop profiling, must stop harassing, and must stop, marginalizing Rastafarians. But as I said, it's not only Rastafarians; it's also other adults who use cannabis, as is their right in terms of the constitution. That as adults, they are allowed to, in their private spaces, use cannabis, and they complain that they live in fear. So it's not only the harassment and the arrest, it's that they live in fear, which in a constitutional state is completely, unacceptable. For my part, in 2002, I took up the case of Mr. Gareth Prince. Mr. Gareth Prince, who was a Rastafarian who completed his legal studies but was not allowed to practice as a lawyer because of
I
his
remember this
previous
case. I remember
conviction.
this case, yes.
Yeah, so I was a student that time, but as part of my studies, we took this case to the African Commission of Human Rights. And since that time, from 2002 up to now, I've been concerned about Mr. Prince's personal situation, but also the broader marginalization of cannabis. So both institutionally and personally, I continue to be very much concerned about the ongoing marginalization of Rastafari and other cannabis using adults.
So, with regard to the Rastafarians, you mentioned something earlier. There's two. There you mentioned cultivation and then use, and then under the Act in South Africa, it allows for personal private use. If I'm correct,
Yes.
how do you, what can you do under current legislation with regard to A, cultivation, and B, the definition, which I gather is quite fuzzy, of personal and private use? And obviously that comes down to the social conditions that people may live in. So if you're a wealthy person who lives in the nice suburbs in your house and you buy
Yeah.
some cannabis, nobody's going to know. So
Yes.
these are issues you're obviously facing. What are you able to define? And under the law, what can you do other than take new cases to the courts or various other bodies to try and change the law?
Yes. So let's start with what the legislation provides for. It provides for three things: the use, the possession, and the cultivation. Use, possession, and cultivation. What it does not provide for is the dealing in cannabis, meaning selling and buying cannabis, which
Does
of
that
course
mean, is that just
is a
selling and
problem.
buying, or does that mean exchanging as well? Gifting?
You see, exchanging is not provided for. You see, it only talks about dealing because dealing is a criminal offense under the Drugs Act.
Yeah.
So that's a big problem. The first problem is the following: if you say adults are allowed to use and possess cannabis, where would they source it? So the sourcing of it is a problem. The second problem is the transportation. I buy it from somewhere, I wish to transport it. What happens in between? That's the second problem. The third problem is how much am I allowed to possess in my personal capacity for it not to be presumed dealing? Because what happens is that police officers will stop me, they'll find me with 100 grams of cannabis or 100 kilograms of cannabis and say, we presume that you are dealing, and then they arrest me. So that's a big, big issue, that it is left to the discretion of individual police officers to presume what is reasonable for private use and not to be presumed as dealing. That's a big, big problem.
That's a huge problem.
What is supposed to happen is that there's supposed to be regulations that accompany the act. The regulations will clarify the amount which will be possessed, It will clarify the sourcing where people can source, cannabis. Now, as you say, the act was signed into law last year in May. More than a year later, we still don't have the regulations. The regulations which will make it very clear how much can adults possess for private use.
And
So
who
that's
is
a huge.
who's meant to be defining the regulations? Which government department, and are they actually doing it?
The department that is supposed to be doing this is the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. We invited them to our roundtable. So in February this year, we organized a roundtable with Rastafari leaders, with cannabis using organizations, with state departments, with the police, with prosecutors, in a roundtable safe space to say, please listen to the challenges of Rastafari people. But secondly, where are you with the regulations? This was February this year. Now, they informed us that, we have taken the draft to, the chief legal advisor. We have taken the draft to the other ministries, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Police, inter-departmental consultation. But now we have a new Minister of Justice. So we've put the draft to the new Minister of Justice, and we expect that within a few weeks, we'll be able to publish the draft of that regulation. This was in February. So there's a huge delay. As a South African Human Rights Commission, I can say that we are very concerned about the long delay. The long delay means that people still get arrested unlawfully. It means there's a lot of uncertainty, but it also means that people continue to live in fear, of just being able to practice what is there in the act, what is there in court papers, but also what is their constitutional right to religion and to culture. So
for example, there's been no directive from the police department saying to the various departments around the country, because regulations are in play, you shouldn't be coming down so hard on cannabis users while we're in this. They're still living last year, the year before, the year before. The thinking within the police force is we're not going to change anything until people tell us to do so.
Well, that's a very important question. Ironically, in 2023, the National Commissioner of Police issued a directive, a very clear directive, to say do not arrest until the regulations are out. So the National Commissioner of Police has given out that directive. We then in December wrote another letter to the National Commissioner to say, National Commissioner, thank you for the directive, but we are sorry to report that that directive is not being implemented. People still continue to be arrested. And we also publicly issued that letter as a way of accounting to the Rastafarian people and other people, but also as a way of putting pressure. So that was in December 2024. The commissioner then issued a second directive affirming his previous directive to say, I remind my officers, my police officers, do not do this while we are still in this limbo. Unfortunately, even that second directive seems not to have been respected
fallen on deaf ears is the phrase, isn't it?
Yes. So we're in a situation where we have come together with another constitutional body called the Commission for the Promotion and the Protection of the Rights of Cultural, Linguistic, and Religious Communities, which is another institution. So we have come together to write another email to the minister to say, the minister, we are now coming to you again together to put you on terms, not to put you on terms, but to ask you, where are these regulations? We are in July now. The act was signed in May 2024. So that's where we are. And I can publicly say this publicly, that as a Human Rights Commission, we are considering litigation to force two things. One, litigation that will interdict police officers from arresting adult possessors of cannabis. So, one, to interdict them, to stop them from arresting. Two, to ask the National Commissioner to issue a moratorium, not even a directive, but a moratorium on the arrests. And then three, for the court to compel the department to issue those directives without delay. So that's where we are. We have been engaging with the department, but we are seriously considering litigation in this area.
And if you have to go into litigation, how quickly do things happen at the moment in the court system? I mean, are you still really having your can kicked down the road by 4 or 5 months because the courts are jammed with so much at the moment?
Yes, no, that's a reality that the courts are overwhelmed, that litigation always takes a long time. The parties have to exchange papers. The court, has to sit down the matter. So that will take a long time. That's why our preference was, number one, engaging with the department. Number two, inviting them to a round table so that they hear not from us, but from affected people, how this situation is affecting them. And number three, to write to them to say, we don't want to go to court. Can we resolve these issues through, writing to you? So we will hear from the department within the course of this month, July, and then we'll see what their response is, and then we'll take it from there. But you are absolutely correct. Litigation will take time.
I mean, this is sort of an overarching question. Now we've gone into the details of the processes. Do you feel that government in South Africa wants to do something, but the wheels of bureaucracy are so slow that it creates an inbuilt incapability within the system to do what it wants to do?
Yes, I mean, let me just be clear to say, I believe that the department and the minister and everyone else wants to do the right thing. They don't have a choice. There is a constitutional court judgment.
Yeah.
There is a clear legislation signed by the president. So there's no choice in the matter. The apex court, the highest court, delivered the judgment. The legislation passed by parliament, but also signed by the president. So there's no choice in the matter. But two things. One, there's a 100-year history of a culture of discrimination against cannabis using individuals. It's a
just as there is any other jurisdiction on the planet.
Absolutely, because we'll remember that this year is the anniversary of the 100-year, prohibition of cannabis internationally this year. And secondly, in South Africa, there continues to be a culture that discriminates against Rastafari people. People seeing them as, criminals, people seeing them as people that they don't understand. So we must be honest with all of us to say there is a culture of marginalization. There is an institutional culture in various departments where the police, profiles and harass, these individuals. So there is that. But number three, the reality is that the regulations must be accompanied by commercialization of cannabis so that it can be sold. So we are not there yet. So we are still waiting for the commercialization framework to be distributed and to be enacted. So one, the delay with the regulations that will specify the quantity, what is private use and so forth. But two, there's a bigger conversations about the commercialization of cannabis, which will make it clear that cannabis can be sold in South Africa. At the moment, that process has started. We are concerned that process is also very slow, but we are also concerned that the licenses that are there at the moment are prohibitive,
Well,
big
they're
multinational
designed.
companies.
Look, having just visited a couple of places when I was in Johannesburg, they're designed for the farmer end of the business, shall we say? And it's a big, it's obviously
Absolutely.
it's a very big discussion, not just for the Rastafarian community, but people who have been
Mhm.
growing hemp and cannabis for hundreds of years in South Africa in a small holding
That's
way,
right.
probably the best way to say it. Do you feel that there's any understanding within the government on how to manage providing these licenses? Because I remember having a conversation 3 years ago with the Black Farmers Association of South Africa president on exactly this issue. Is licenses are created in a as say a fashion that you're dealing with the mining industry or the oil industry or the agribusiness industry, but cannabis isn't that. It isn't that yet, thank God, and it shouldn't be that. How are you finding people in proactive positions in South Africa trying to explain this to government on how to manage this license issue? Because, as you say, that ties in totally to people's personal rights, doesn't it?
It does, and we can say a number of things there. The first thing to say is that you are quite correct. There are small scale farmers in the rural areas who, for hundreds of years, have been growing and living off cannabis. They've been able to survive and provide for their families in a very sustainable way that doesn't damage the climate. For hundreds of years. Number two, cannabis is not only for smoking. You know, People use cannabis for a number of ways. For rituals, for communicating with the god by burning it as like sage, by washing with it, for so many things. So it is what we understand is also part of indigenous culture. It's really an indigenous culture, not just for Rastafari and for other people. It's really
Well,
part
that's
of
what I was
Rastafari.
driving at, because these discussions are now turning up in other jurisdictions around the world. And in the US, I just spoke to a lawyer last week who created a compact between the Minnesota tribes and the state government there. And
Excellent.
I've got him coming out to talk about
Excellent.
how he did that, because I believe this is a core foundational base that was ignored, say, in the last 20 years when discussing how to turn cannabis from an illegal narcotic into what it actually is. And
Yes.
this discussion is only coming out after a lot of people have made a lot of money in the wrong way. How do you
Yes.
feel?
Yes.
How do you feel we explain that to government?
Yes. Before that, the third thing to say is that, for the past 50 years, Rastafari people have suffered, have been discriminated, have been arrested. They're living with criminal records. Advocating for the decriminalization of cannabis, it is quite sad that the people who were at the center of not only safeguarding the herb, but who have suffered for it, are not benefiting from commercialization. That's very, very sad. It
Well,
makes me sad personally.
welcome to capitalism.
Absolutely. No, that's how capitalism works, by appropriating long-standing struggles, and those people who have suffered do not benefit from that. So we know that there's a steering committee that was uh, convened by the Department of Trade, Industry, and Competition, which is a state department. So that steering committee involves farmers, it involves traditional leaders, it involves indigenous law experts, it involves medical doctors, it also involves members of the Rastafari community. So we were hoping that that steering committee, which will advise the state on commercialization, will really make this very clear that commercialization is important for the economy of the country. That's fine. But as we do so, let's not forget that people who have been at the center of the struggle, must benefit from this. Let's not forget that in rural towns, there have been mothers and fathers who have survived by cultivating this cannabis. So we are hoping that that steering committee will drive the department to understand the complexity, but also the need to have different levels of commercialization. Of course, yeah, it's fine to have big agriculture to export, whatever that means, but let's not make the process onerous, too burdensome for everyone who wants to be a part of this.
Now, can I ask you another overarching question? This is, although it's slow and is, as you just said, the perfect word, onerous in South Africa, it is happening. It is a discussion. How do you feel South Africa is doing compared to the rest of the continent? And does it have lessons that you've already learnt that it could be teaching other jurisdictions? Or should South Africa be looking at other jurisdictions on the continent and saying, you've done it better in certain ways? I mean, I know that there's been some sort of progress in Rwanda. There's limited progress in Ghana. I wouldn't mention Zimbabwe at the moment. I don't think much really has happened except for a few press releases. How do you feel that the country is doing within the continent?
I'll be honest with you, I've not studied the other jurisdiction, but I was part of a panel organized by one of our partners, All Fields of Green for All, where we had input from Tanzania and I think Kenya. And I was surprised to hear that they've gone a long way in terms of regulating these matters. But to be honest with you, I've not studied the comparative framework, and I won't be able to say how we are doing vis-a-vis the continent.
And do you think, we haven't got long to run, on the same topic, do you think African jurisdictions should be looking and working together to identify the issues and the problems, basically, well, in two ways, to develop a pan-African approach to it, but also to protect yourself from fairly predatory capitalism, which has already shown its teeth in parts of Africa, and I would suggest will show its teeth again, ever more strongly once more capital comes into cannabis. I mean, do you think Africa should try and work together to protect itself?
No, absolutely. There are countries like Eswatini, Lesotho.
Well, those are exactly the places I was thinking about, yeah.
Which historically have produced, are known as cannabis producing countries, but they are small countries. And it's easy for them to be put under pressure bilaterally by, big commercial companies, by big, international organizations, even interstate organizations. South Africa is big, but it's also that big also. So if we come together, create a common framework to say, at the minimum, as African countries, we agree with commercialization, but this will be the framework that we agree on. Number one, it must be geared towards not excluding small-scale farmers and others. Number two, it must be done in a way that does not damage the environment and the climate. Number three, it must be done in a way that doesn't lead to land grab.